All For One may be the sorriest main villain to have ever stepped foot in the game. He may be the phoniest purveyor of pain to have ever picked up the main villain mantle. And before the My Hero fans start trying to come for my neck, okay, before they start trying to like gear shift punch me in the chest, I want y'all to hear me out. Okay, I want y'all to listen to what I have to say from one My Hero fan to another, because I reckon that by the end of this video, you may just find yourself agreeing with what I have to say about All For One. Welcome back to Week Speak, the series where I talk about weekly anime that I enjoyed watching over the past 7 days. Over this past week, My Hero Academia Season 8 has once again held the majority share of my fixation, right? It has once again gotten me enthralled with this story in the same way that I was when I first started it 8 years ago. In this week's episode in particular, My Hero Academia Season 8 Episode 4, this episode had me thinking a lot about All For One. It had me thinking about my first impressions of All For One from way back in 2017. I had always been fond of his original design, right? Like, I had always thought the image of a literal faceless smile was some of the coldest shit to have ever been cooked ever. It also got me thinking about my current impression of All For One, which is well, admittedly far less positive. And before we actually go any further, I want to quickly clarify myself a bit when it comes to these quote-unquote negative things that I have to say about All For One. This video isn't meant to critique All For One as a character, right? I'm not trying to like make a meta critique and say that All For One failed as a narrative device or whatever. Actually, when it comes to that sort of meta analysis, I feel quite the opposite, right? I feel like Kohei Horikoshi, the author of My Hero Academia, set out to write a childish, pathetic, egotistical, stinky bum with a receding hairline, and succeeded very thoroughly in writing that childish, pathetic, egotistical, blah, 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 blah. You get the idea. This video is more so meant to engage with how pathetic of a man this character was written to be. It's meant to acknowledge how categorically putrid this nigga's existence has been from birth to death. And yeah, so I guess think of this video as less of a My Hero critique video and more of a video meant to give the writing of My Hero Academia its props. Except I guess we're giving this story its props by frying up one of its most important characters like a fucking caniac combo. Double fries, no coleslaw. Never coleslaw, bro. I bet All For One eats coleslaw, bro. He strikes me as a coleslaw munching ass nigga, bro. Dirty breath ass nigga. Anywho, without any further ado, let's take a peek into this past week with My Hero Academia Season 8 Episode 4. Thanks again for watching, and subscribe if you haven't already. I'm trying to do this series like at least every week. So this episode in particular is the first episode of the season where we're not starting off with a look at the big main battle, right? It's the first episode where we're instantaneously teleported into flashback land. And more importantly, we're being taken into the joint flashback of 𝙏𝙖𝙡 and All For One, with the perspective of the flashback skewing slightly in All For One's favor. Now, the fact that we're getting an All For One flashback this late in the game is important for a variety of reasons, but I think the main reason that this flashback stands out within the series is because a lot of All For One's past up until now has just been entirely shrouded in mystery. Like, we really don't know shit worth a damn about All For One when it comes to his upbringing, his philosophy on life, why he does the things that he does. I mean, we can infer a lot based on his actions in the series and some of the things that he says, but when it comes to like concrete answers, unless it's directly tied to One For All and the lore behind that ability, we really don't have that much info on All For One, or well, at least we didn't until now. This episode attempts to explain the anomaly that is All For One by picking up a few months before the boy was even born. The earliest sight that we get of All For One is him being in his mother's womb, and yeah, I have a variety of thoughts on this scene right here. First things first, am I tripping, or did they just animate All For One tweaking off the henny at like the ripe old age of like -3 months old? Like, I'm pretty certain we just saw All For One's mom drinking while pregnant, which, you know, already comes with its own host of problems. But the fact that they made the conscious decision to show All For One reacting to the alk in her bloodstream is crazy to me, because I'm not gonna lie, if I was getting marinated in dark liquor before my brain had even developed, before my shit even had any folds in it, Yeah, nigga, I'd probably come out the womb evil as shit too. Let's just keep it a full Wendy's double stack right now. We learned that in his infancy, All For One had literally eaten his mother vampire style and stolen her quirk. This quirk, funnily enough, being the spiky bone quirk that we always see him using even in the present day to skewer his ops like a beef kebab. We're also told that All For One, from his very birth, was just pre-installed with this self-centered mindset, right? This sort of selfish mindset where he obsessed over the idea of ownership. He wanted to own everything, from the people in his life, aka his mother and his brother, to the attention of others, the attention of strangers who had nothing to do with him. He wanted to own it all, and if anyone got between him and this twisted, seemingly instinctual possessiveness that he had, yeah, shit was not going to end well for that individual. Now, for the time being, I want you to put a pin in that possessiveness, right? I want you to keep All For One selfishness in the back of your mind so that we can circle back to talking about it later when we get into the themes of his character and blah, blah, blah nerd shit. But before we get into that shit, we gotta get a little ignorant, bro. In the spirit of All For One himself, in the spirit of Halloween and spooky nigga shit, you see I got the pumpkin back there with Yugi, you know, like on my Halloween shit, since I'm assuming this video is probably going to drop on or around Halloween. So yeah, happy Halloween, I guess, if you... But in the spirit of dark, campy, over-the-top villainous shit, you know what I'm saying, Halloween type shit, I want to just briefly go over the spooky proceedings of All For One, bro, because this nigga All For One is just so over-the-top villainous that it's actually pretty corny, bro. Oh, goof ass, little ass, spooky ass, corny ass little nigga, bro. I'll smack that nigga in the back of the head. No, I won't. He'll murder me in cold blood unless, who knows, maybe I'm the 10th successor of One For All. So we don't know much about the lives of All For One and his brother 𝙏𝙖𝙡 when it comes to the years that took place between their birth and their early childhood. Even though I don't think it's 100% necessary story-wise, I'm low-key kind of curious about what these niggas were getting up to during those few years, because it's pretty clear to me that they had someone raising them during those early years. For one, they can both talk and walk and, you know, put on clothes, do all that shit that kids can't really learn how to do without the guidance of an adult somewhere in their life. But on top of that, the fact that 𝙏𝙧 seems to have developed an entirely different moral code than his brother, who was just a born tweaker, does imply that, you know, perhaps they did have an upstanding adult in their life at some point. I mean, All For One probably killed his or her ass if we're being real, but low-key, in a way, I feel like this implied headcanon hypothetical adult that I'm making up right now kinda ended up playing a big role in the story of One For All as a quirk, because, you know, they set 𝙏𝙧's moral code, and I mean, you get the idea from there. Regardless, back to All For One spooky shit, right? So the first fatality that we see him rack up is actually a string of fatalities that he upped on a bunch of anti-quirk insurgents back when he was like, shit, 4, maybe 5. Now, even though these quirk racists were actively in the process of plotting on niggas with quirks, All For One didn't kill them because of that. No, he's not some sort of quirk supremacist like Magneto or something. All For One is a self-supremacist, and so, yeah, he proceeded to kill these gentlemen for having committed the vile crime of looking away from him, of having averted their gaze off of his body. The next group of body that we see All For One stacking is yet another group of random men who presumably had access to a quirk that he wanted for himself. This time around, he's in like a red light district, slaying these niggas with the same bone spears that he had stolen from his mother at birth, and in somewhat of a micro representation of their relationship as a whole, when All For One's brother 𝙏𝙧 tries to stop the boy from running up these mass murders by throwing a little empty soda can at him, All For One proceeds to kick him like an abused puppy and just keep going on about his vile ways, only really sparing his brother's life because he views his brother as one of his possessions. You then get a look at this sort of foundational scene where All For One and 𝙏𝙧 are both reading comic books, right? So again, going back to that same theme we had with All Might and Anpanman, where it seems like a lot of the early gen heroes were inspired by fiction. But as they're reading these books, 𝙏𝙧 naturally starts to identify with the hero in the story, as you're supposed to, while All For One, on the other hand, takes interest in the villain of the story and starts to basically mold his whole worldview around how this literal comic book villain operates. He's like one of those 2019 Joker PFP niggas, but a lot worse. This is why media literacy is important, by the way, because, well, if you're reading a comic book literally called Captain Hero and you find yourself unironically venerating the big evil demon kaiju villain who presumably loses in the end, yeah, bro, it's time to like look within and maybe, you know, think about some stuff. Anyway, back to the carnage. The next body that we see All For One catch is that of the Chinese glowing baby, who to this day is widely considered to be the first quirk user. Now, interestingly enough, based on the info received in this episode, we as an audience know that All For One's mom is technically the first quirk user, and All For One and 𝙏𝙖𝙡 were technically number 2 and 3 respectively. I think. The timeline is a bit murky to me, I'm not gonna lie, but yeah, after finding out that All For One was responsible for the death of the glowing baby, we fast forward from his teen years to his adult years, and this is the point where All For One's story starts to look familiar, right? This is the point where he gives 𝙏𝙖𝙡 the strength stockpiling quirk, and Kudo and them come in. It's the point where we see All For One run the gauntlet on all the different users of One For All and their families until All Might blows his muffin cap off, thus making him bald-headed and faceless. We get a few more interesting tidbits in the All For One's life story, right? Like, we learn that he apparently started a cult at some point, and it's because of this cult that he met that evil ass Dr. Garaki or whatever his name was. But this is basically the full scope of what we learn about All For One before he goes and gets that ass blasted by Bakugo. Pause. Now, as I was writing this video, I struggled a bit when it came to making sense of this backstory, right? Like, I understood it from a narrative perspective, I understood the lore and whatnot, and I was glad that we finally got a peek into All For One's origins. Like, that was cool, but I struggled to make sense of it from a character perspective, you dig? I struggled to understand why we got that backstory, especially considering the fact that throughout the whole backstory, we didn't really see All For One become the way that he is today. We simply saw evidence that he had always been that way to begin with. And then I started to think about Bakugo, the hero that he was placed up against in his final battle, and after thinking about it from that perspective, it all started to come together and make more sense. You see, Bakugo as he stands right now is sort of like the embodiment of bettering oneself, right? I spoke about this at length in my last week's speak, and so I'm not going to go full yapper mode again, at least not in regards to Bakugo, but to make a long story short, everything about in-game Bakugo, from the way that he views others to the way that he utilizes his quirk now with the whole self-detonating explosion sweat particle rain bombs or whatever, all of that shit is an evolution from where his character was at the beginning of the story. He's faster, stronger, smarter, relatively nicer than he was before. I mean, he's still kind of an asshole, but, you know, chaotic good, I guess. But all of this evolution that Bakugo underwent through the series, all of this change was brought about by necessity, right? It happened because in one way or another, Bakugo was put in a position where he had to become a better, stronger, faster, less ego-centered hero if he wanted to keep up with basically the rising tides of the versus power ceiling. I mean, if you want an example of this evolution being brought about by necessity, you really don't have to look any further than Bakugo's fight with All For One. I think this is like actually the perfect illustration of what I'm talking about. In the last episode, All For One was way faster than Bakugo, and so Bakugo had to basically evolve on the spot and get way faster so that he could keep up with All For One and stop him. In this current episode, All For One became way tankier than what Bakugo could handle, especially when he pulled out that whole massive body horror omni factor attack or whatever. And so again, to keep up with that, Bakugo had to evolve once more, this time enhancing his efficacy with his explosion quirk so that he could basically pinpoint snipe All For One in the face, as well as like bring down exploding rain on him and all type of crazy shit, really. You look at All For One's character, on the other hand, compared to Bakugo, and it's almost like a polar opposite, right? We're looking at a character who has never had to evolve, who has never had to better themselves in life because, I mean, simply put, he was able to bullshit his way through life from the very beginning to the very end just off the strength of his quirk alone. I know it seems like this story is painting All For One as like this force of nature, right? It seems like they're trying to paint him as like this inevitable force of evil that just came out of the womb on demon mode, and I don't think that's entirely false, okay? Like, I do think that there's probably something severely wrong in his head, maybe like some sort of super fetal alcohol syndrome. I don't know. But when I really stopped to take a look at All For One's character, his selfishness, we're pulling that selfishness, that possessiveness back off the shelf now. I told you we were going to get back to it, bro. But when I look at the nature of things like All For One's selfishness, All For One's tendency to throw tantrums, All For One's obsession with attention, All For One's grandiose, self-centered worldview, when I look at these aspects of his character and put them together, I find myself coming to the conclusion that this nigga All For One isn't actually inherently evil at his core. I mean, he does evil things, of course, but I think it's low-key more accurate to describe All For One as just a baby, bro, a big, pathetic, grown-ass baby. And I don't mean that in the sense that, like, I'm trying to call him childish, right? Like, I'm not saying he was just a man-child, even though he is definitely a man-child among several other disparaging titles that I could give him right now. I'm trying to do you one further and assert that All For One is literally, like, literally a grown man with grown man sensibilities and grown man capabilities operating with the core instinctual lack of socialization that you would find in a literal infant, bro. Like, hear me out on this one, all right? Let's take a look at All For One's selfishness again, a core aspect of his character. We're told that All For One is literally selfish from birth and blah, blah, blah. He ate his mother, so on and so forth, right? Scary shit. Halloween vampire type shit. But, bro, who wasn't selfish as a baby, bro? You, me, and everyone else watching this video all lived the first 2 or so years of our lives as little self-centered parasites that, if you were breastfed, quite literally ate your mom, bro. Like, granted, we didn't do the whole All For One vampire thing. I hope you didn't do that. But we also didn't really physically have the capability to do such harm. We were nerfed as babies, whereas All For One, on the other hand, I mean, he did have that capability. All right, so this is the part of the video where I start talking about some random shit that's only tangentially related to the episode, and consequently about 5% of y'all click off. And so at least leave a sub before you go, man. Or a like, maybe, please. But as I was looking for support in my position that All For One eating his mom as an infant wasn't, like, inherently evil, I got curious and I wanted to see if there were any cases of this in nature, right? Any cases out there in the animal kingdom where newborns eating their mother was, like, a thing. Well, turns out it is a thing. It's called matrophagy. A lot of spiders do it, and yeah, that's all. Just thought that was interesting and you might want to know. See, my segue was short this time. You never really know how long or short the tangential yap will be with me. Anyway, back to the topic at hand, right? We, as well socialized humans, eventually end up evolving out of our self-centered nature because, simply put, it's more efficient to live that way. As our needs become more complex than just milk, attention, and sleep, we had to evolve accordingly, learning how to speak and then learning how to socialize and collaborate and, you know, become an all-around functional member of society. All For One, on the other hand, he never really had to evolve past a certain point. Ever since birth, he could just ride on the back of his quirk and take whenever he wanted something, just like a baby throwing a tantrum and immediately getting its needs satiated at that very instant. It sort of reminds me of how they say a lot of celebrities stop maturing at the age they get famous, right? The idea being that once you become super famous, your maturity kind of just flatlines because you're not receiving any pushback in life from those around you. Yeah, All For One's life is kind of like that, but like a million times worse, and also with a lot more mass murder involved. It's low-key kind of tragic when you think about it. I mean, it's not like All For One asked to be born as a henny baby, and it's not like he chose to be born with a quirk that would literally hamper his ability to socialize into a functional member of society. But then again, by that same vein, what he did choose for himself was a life full of villainy, demonics, and treachery. When, like 𝙏𝙖𝙡 said, with that same quirk, he could have easily become one of the kindest, most helpful people on the planet, you know, using his quirk to heal people from their quirk-related ailments and things of that nature. So now that we've established that All For One is quite literally a pathetic talking baby operating a grown man's body, not only do a lot of his childish, impulsive, and quite frankly stupid actions throughout the story make a lot of sense, his death in and of itself also seems a lot more poetic, as thanks to the damage wrought upon him by the great explosion murder god himself hitting the United States of Smash on his ass, All For One spent his last seconds on the earth physically embodying the baby that he's been on the inside inside all along. I think this idea of one's outer self compared to their inner self is a constant theme in My Hero, right? We're constantly seeing people with dual representations of their outer self and their inner self living in tandem. I mean, we even have disembodied inner selves living within other human beings when it comes to certain multi-quirks like One for All and All for One. Now, being a manga reader and knowing where this story goes, all I can say in the most spoiler-free manner possible is that this theme is very important during this home stretch of the story, okay? So keep that whole inner self soul thing in mind as we progress through these last few episodes. But what I will tell you now, definitively, is that there is no character in this series with a cooler representation of their inner self than fucking Hawks' quirk factor canonically pulling hoes in the spirit realm, bruh. Because what that implies is that Hawks is so swagged out that it wasn't even something he learned, bro. It was something literally etched into his soul since birth. And I'm sorry, that's too tough, bro. You know how mad I would be if I was All for One and I found another grown man pulling more hoes than me inside my body? Nigga had to start doing push-ups, bro. Absolutely abysmal, bro. Absolutely abysmal. Anywho, thanks for watching. Stay blessed, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.